found out that Wyoming County was slated to have over 2,000 industrial wind turbines strewn throughout the entire 16-town county. And I said, like hell they are. They were going to surround Silver Lake and Letchworth State Park with these contraptions. And the more I started researching it and getting involved, it doesn't take long to find out what a giant consumer fraud the whole thing is. Let me put it in Warren Buffett's words, who said it best. We get tax credits if we build wind farms. That's the only reason to build them. They don't make sense without the tax credits. It's a massive transfer of wealth scheme that takes from the taxpayers and ratepayers and gives to the already connected rich cronies who then donate back to the political cronies who push this crap on us. The people that are paying for this garbage with our tax dollars are the very people like Linda, Kathy, and Al who are being assaulted with their own taxpayer money. Al had to sell his home because he couldn't even live in it anymore. And you can tell how passionate I get when I talk about this because it's not right. Governor Cuomo stood at the podium after researching the effects of fracking for over 6 years and said, we've decided to ban it in New York State because I wouldn't want my family living next to it. As much as we have applied and asked, had meetings with state representatives, they have never, ever done any research on the health impacts of these things on people as they continue to site them only hundreds of feet from people's homes. Besides the fact that it's a massive consumer fraud, New York State turbines are averaging a pathetic 23% capacity factor if they're producing at all. The only jobs that were created here are the repair jobs. The only thing guys you see working here are the giant cranes that are always fixing the giant pieces of junk. The company that first came to my hometown of Cast Isle, New York, Silver Springs, and the adjoining town of Perry and Warsaw was going to be included in the same project, was Zilka Renewable Energy. It was owned by a Saudi Arabian banker. Goldman Sachs soon bought it out shortly after they came to our area around 2003. That's when I found out about it and got involved in 2003, 2004. And Goldman Sachs owned it, and it became Horizon Wind. They dubbed these things with little names that are supposed to make them more palatable to the public. Our project was called Dairy Hills Wind Farm. They are not wind farms. They are in sprawling industrial wind factories that destroy the habitat, destroy civility. They are the most environmentally unfriendly things that you could ever imagine. They destroy communities. Every community that's been targeted in this state is destroyed. People hate one another. The population continues to go down in Wyoming County. Nobody's getting free or reduced rate electricity here. That's a joke. New York State has some of the highest electricity rates in the nation, in large part because of the billions of dollars that are being funneled into this massive scam. Anyway, I could go on for hours about this, but I'm going to turn it over to my friend Al Vliestra, who had to sell his dream home because he could no longer live in it because of the effects of infrasound from the 308 turbines that are on the west side of the Warsaw Valley in Wyoming County.
I built a new house in 2001 in one of the most beautiful places in Wyoming County, and the first 2 or 3 years everything was fine. Right, 2004, 2005, as more and more wind farms came along, I started to notice subtle changes in my health. Immune system was down. I couldn't prevent myself from catching colds. And I ought to back this up a little bit. I've done the hard masonry trade for 40 years, there was nobody in better health than myself. And gradually, over a period of time, I started to realize I couldn't concentrate, couldn't focus anymore. This would be around 2008, 2009. I began to get more and more arthritis symptoms. And eventually I actually approached one of the town board members thinking it was a cell tower next door to me that was giving me problems. So he researched it for me, and he came up with a pile of papers that pretty well nailed every symptom I had. But he says this is exactly what the people in wind country are complaining about also. So at this point, I really don't know what to make of it. So at some point, I went to the audiologist, and I says, I got 9 symptoms, and I'll tell you what they are. I says, it's either the wind turbines or the cell tower. And she stopped me on symptom number 5. She says, Al, you can stop. It's the wind turbines, which flabbergasted me because they're 12 miles away. And from there on, my symptoms were basically ringing in the ears, couldn't sleep anymore, and lack of focus, lack of concentration, which I probably still have difficulties with. But make a long story short, I moved out of the house, rented an apartment down the street 10, 20 miles, and now I'm even farther away, and things started to improve. And just recently, a couple weeks ago, I had to come back to Wethersfield and spend the night to take care of my daughter. And the first night, I only stayed there one night. I was like, oh my God, every time you start to second guess yourself, the very first night, couldn't sleep. I could actually hear things that nobody else can hear apparently. The next morning, you wake up, my ears are like, everything hurts. It's like everything sounds like tinfoil being crunched. And I had to stay one more night. By the end of that night, I become very sick. It's typical. It's the same every time. You come down with a sinus and a bronchitis, more antibiotics, and the despondency and the depression and the suicidal part. It's hard to explain. You get to a point where you don't care if you make it or not, and I guess that's my story there. There's so much to talk about, so much to cover, which we can't do. But I have a friend who lives out there, and years ago, I says, Bill, I says, do you ever have any issues like I'm having? And at the time, he says, no, I don't think so, Al. Well, last year, he came on to me and said, Al, I want to talk to you after we get done bowling. I'm like, okay, about the wind turbines. He says, you know, my wife is starting to have problems. I'm having problems. I says, okay, I'm going to let you go first and tell me what your symptoms are, and then I'll tell you what mine are. So he went on and related many that are similar to mine. At the end, I says, okay, it's my turn. I says, one of the first things, my digestive system started to shut down. And he looks at me wide-eyed, and he says, I've been in the hospital 3 times for blockages. I says, okay. We went on down a list. He's also a counselor. When I got to the very end, I says, you know, at the very worst, suicidal thoughts. His eyes got big again. He says, you would be amazed how many people in this area I counsel for suicide. So that to me was a huge verification of all these things that I've been saying for years. And you can doubt me if you wish. I really can't do anything about that. In fact, I really only care about the health issues more than anything. And it drove me out of my home. And I believe completely that there are so many people around who suffer various ailments that unless you knew, you would never connect to the wind turbines, because a lot of cases you can't see them. It affected my concentration and performance at bowling, if you must know. And if that sounds hokey, if you knew how much concentration and focus it takes to be a really good bowler, you'd understand it. I would come away like, guys, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I'm not playing the lanes correctly, etc., etc. After 3 days away from it, your consciousness comes back. I guess that's about what I've got to say for now.
How much money you lost on your home?
I lost $120,000 on my home, which sat on the market for years, and couldn't get a buyer for it. And one thing about what Mary relates to, we would need a permit to put up a poster for your, let's say, a masonry stand for your mailbox, and yet that affects no one except me, and yet these 350 turbines can be put up that affect everybody. Apparently, no problem. Let me say this. First, I was passively in favor of wind turbines. I had people come along, let me put placards up against them, and I'm like, you know, if this is the way we're going to have to go, we're going to have to go with it. And gradually these farms started, Mary knows better than I do, I think Bliss, Eagle, Sheldon, and the more that came up, the more the health issues increased. I should also say we had a child who cried for 2 years, and eventually I said to Mom, I says, why don't you try moving out in the country where you live? And basically she did better there, and it also ended our relationship in most ways. So that's another part that
part of the disruption.
Part of the disruption, correct. There's just so many things that I can't possibly recall that, and granted, some of them I can't prove because everybody will throw at me that I'm getting older, which is true. But I played softball as a cleanup hitter until I was 60, 61. I've always been athletic and in tip-top health. There's a psycho, whatever you want to call it, part to it, where now I'm despondent and don't feel like working like I used to. It's not just because of age. So I can't explain that part of it, but it's part of it. Well, the audiologist was probably the eye-opener when she gave me a report what every audiologist needs to know about wind turbine noise. It'd be the equivalent of a doctor getting something on the latest disease, Ebola, etc. And if you read that, you would be upset that that kind of knowledge is kept privy in that the general public isn't aware of the dangers of the infrasound. And here's the other thing, not everybody is affected exactly the same. I worked for an engineer who worked at Kodak and I think Fisher Price, and we got to talking about my situation, about me moving. I said, you're probably not going to believe me. He goes, Al, I was a Navy SEAL. I understand it exactly, and I believe you 100%. He says, because I was describing my vision problem and blaming it on the turbulence in the air, whatever. And he says, I believe you 100%. He says, you need to not go there anymore or you literally will go blind and you will literally go crazy if you keep yourself in that environment. This is straight from an engineer. So I thought
/ Navy SEAL.
Had a lot of credibility for me. And it's not always that you find people that are knowledgeable on this topic. In fact, most people aren't. That's why this stuff gets run through. But every wind company official has got to know by now, because I have stacks of it, Mary knows, she has a lot of it, that at least 1/3 of the people are affected by these things in one form or another that we know of. I still think a lot more are affected in ways that they're not even aware of. That's my feeling.
Because I got involved with this early in because my town was impacted before where Elle was living. I've attended numerous meetings, and environmental stakeholder meetings with NYSERDA in Albany, and we finally forced them to have a meeting because there were so many of us attending and complaining. They finally held a meeting specific to wind power in 2009. The former New York State PSC sound engineer testified at that meeting that they are fully aware that infrasound is involved from industrial wind turbines. And he described infrasound as sounds below 20 hertz, which the ear cannot hear, but the body can feel. It causes symptoms like sleeplessness, tinnitus, which I'm experiencing, migraine headaches. It can cause heart palpitations, vertigo, all kinds of cardiac problems. It can cause, and he said the problems get worse the longer a person is exposed to these. Now, it's interesting that the only two people at that NYSERDA meeting that would testify in any way, shape, or form in a negative fashion towards the wind industry were those people who were already retired. And actually, this engineer's intent wasn't to be negative toward the wind industry, it was to be factual. He testified to the reality of infrasound and its effect on human beings and on the inner ear. And then a New York State health official, Dr. Jan Storm, who was at the meeting, testified that they were aware of the problem worldwide, and that there was stimulus money available at the time, this was in 2009, to do studies, which typically studies are done to protect residents in an area of any kind of a project, especially something of the magnitude of this that spreads around for miles and miles. The state never did any health studies because as one of the head people of NYSERDA answered me when I stood up and asked, I said, why are we not looking at the results of what's going on in Europe? Because they've done research projects out of Europe, and 2 to 4 jobs are lost in the rest of the economy because of the as President Obama forewarned us, the resulting skyrocketing electricity rates associated with pursuing this madness. And Germany is testimony to that because they are now paying 3 to 4 times the electricity rates that we are. Is that really what people want? What has pulled this nation into being the greatest nation in the world is having reliable, affordable electricity. You cannot use either of those words in relation to wind. It's not reliable, and it's skyrocketing our electricity rates. They just informed us that Governor Cuomo and the PSC have decided they're not going to line item the costs for renewables in our electricity bills because, God forbid, people know what they're actually paying for this mess. They want to hide it by blending it into other charges and fees on your bills, which some of the fees you can see. They're readily apparent, but they're hiding a lot of it. But anyway, they are fully aware of infrasound. Professionals have advised them of it, but they choose to ignore it and do no health studies. And I refer back to Governor Cuomo doing over 6 years of health studies on fracking and saying he wouldn't want his family living near it, but refusing to do a single study on the infrasound associated with wind turbine.
I'm Kathy Orr. I was from Orangeville, New York, until I was forced to sell my beloved 100 acres of land in God's country because of the negative impacts of the wind turbines. Back in 2007, I had got wind of the fact, no pun intended, that they were headed towards Orangeville. I had a friend in Sheldon, and she was having all kinds of issues from the shadow flicker and the noise. And so I did a little research on them and became horrified. So I started writing articles in the newspaper about what was coming, did some research, contacted my town board, gave them a lot of information, all of which they ignored, as several members on the town board had contracts with the wind company, which happens more often than not in a lot of the wind projects. And so 58 turbines, I believe, was ushered into Wyoming County, New York, and Orangeville, and that was about the third project, third or fourth. And I became very concerned about a couple of things. Number one was that they were supposedly green energy, but they seemed to be ushered in, and through wind company bias, the documentation that the wind company did was not in sync with what I was reading from the World Health Organization, such as some of the problems, the health problems that they've talked about were called Wind Turbine Syndrome. Dr. Nina Pierpont had done information on, and some of it was caused, infrasound was a major problem, and besides the cardiovascular issues, it actually influences the inocular fluid in the body, and that's why a lot of people have ear problems. But beyond that, they were filled with oil. The turbines in Wyoming County were about 430 feet tall, and they are filled with about, at that size, 400 gallons of oil. The cement base is, I believe, well, it can be 30 feet long. It is very deep. It can be 30 feet deep. I mean, 300 foot long. I'm sorry, it's about the size of a football field, but the deepness would be 30 feet. And the cement leaches mercury into the soil. So besides high voltage lines that they're laying underground and overhead, which causes a lot of the microwaves, so there's a lot of issues that are involved with it, besides the fact that they're a large footprint. Nowadays, currently in 2017, the wind companies are attempting to put up 620 to 700 foot tall wind turbines in Somerset, where I moved to because I thought I was safe out of the hills, and there had been no wind turbine projects there until about probably 6 months to a year after I moved there. So I've been involved in fighting these wind turbines since 2007, and am currently possibly going to be fighting the same thing. Property damage loss is a very large effect. I sold a farm that was 100 acres in Orangeville, and according to what I got for it, I believe that I lost around 100 grand on that farm. Some of the other effects, while I did experience the construction phase of the wind turbine projects, which is noisy. You're up in the morning at 6 in the morning to 7. They come in, they ruin the roads, and they never do quite fix them. It's noisy, and so at the point after they were constructed, I did witness the noise for a period of time until I sold, which was very annoying, especially at night. The day is bad enough because I have a farm and I like being outside. It's like the sound of a continuous jet engine trying to land that never lands. Today, driving in, being a rainy day, really emphasizes the noise, and I had my window down as I drove by my once beautiful farm, which now stands in the middle of 18 wind turbines, 430 feet tall, within a mile and a half of the farm that I left. And all I heard was, it sounded like a bunch of airplanes warming up, and each turbine makes its own unique noise. They creak and they groan, and the wind sound is different. so that when you get the cumulative impact of a bunch of wind turbines, people forget it's not just one. You're at the mercy of them. And when you can't sleep at night and you wake up, all of a sudden you get a harsher wind, especially in the winter, the fall, and this wet weather. If they're on the west side of you, which a bunch of them are on our Croats Road, myself, Kathy Orr, and Linda Maxon, it's constant noise, and it's very aggravating, it's very stressful, and it does cause a lot of agitation because you don't feel good the next day because you're tired all day, and it just goes on and on. So basically, I did leave, and as I say now, the wind turbines are worse. They're taller. If they're 620 feet tall to 700 feet tall, which would be 60-some stories to, 70 stories, the noise has to be worse. They've never put them up anywhere. These are the turbines that are slated for Chautauqua County, for the shores of Lake Ontario, and briefly, a very short time ago, our beloved Governor Como, and of course I am being facetious, stood on the shores of the Long Island where they are trying to put an offshore project of these big turbines. And Governor Como announced to the public, don't worry, you won't see them. They're going to be 30 miles out. You won't hear them. So we are very happy that finally Governor Como is acknowledging that they are noisy and they shouldn't be close to people's houses. It's an industrial wind turbine complex. It's a factory, as Mary Kay mentioned, and it is not, you cannot live among them and be happy. So you take your choice. I also, one more thing I want to mention is during the time that we were researching and fighting these wind turbines here in Orangeville, my husband was under stress of some cardiovascular issues that got worse and worse. And I drove him down to Arizona because there was a holistic cardiologist down there. The chemical medicine didn't help him at all. And Dr. Weiss, I have a letter from him, which I read to my town board, that said, in his opinion, that my husband, Bob Orr, could not live under these wind turbines, that there was no way he could. And do you think that that wind company and that town board cared? I still ended up with 6 to 7 wind turbines across the street from my house, probably the nearest one being 1,320 feet as far as we're told. Nobody was really able to measure them to find out. But my husband subsequently died in 2013. I put the farm up for sale. This all happened 4 years ago, and had to sell my farm and get out, thinking I was moving to a turbine-free area, but I can't get my husband back, and the stress of fighting this project did not help him at all. And, so that's the truth. It's all about the money. The hell with the people that are paying the taxes, and it is very politically, it is a political problem because the people supporting it are also getting money if they sign contracts and if they help the wind company by alternating the zoning, changing the zoning if it's not exactly right. And one more thing with the World Health Organization advised back then that they should not be any closer than 1.25 miles at the nearest, and so to be 1,320 feet from a house is criminal. So thank you very much.
What became of the farm you sold? What did they do?
It was sold to a corporation farmer who knew the wind turbines were coming and didn't care. He turned it into soybean production and subsequently subdivided the house and sold it to some poor sucker who paid $45,000 for it and now is being assessed over $90,000 for it. And apparently I haven't talked to the person living there now, but they thought they got a deal, but that story might change. And that's next door to Linda Maxon's 2621 Croats Road in Orangeville is where I lived. And by the way, the contracts that these farmers sign, really, they should have had their head examined, and I think now they wish they would have, because what it says in the contract was that at any time the wind company can decide to change the position of where they told the people that the wind turbine was going to be. Now, this gentleman, and his first name is Van, he had said he would not take a turbine on his home property. He had kids there, so at the last minute, they put an access road 75 feet from his house, in between his house and barn and sugar shack, right through the kids' riding arena, and put a turbine up right behind his house. And he has a view of probably, I'm going to estimate 7, 8 closer, but I had heard that, number one, he wanted to sue the wind company, but he had signed a contract. And in these contracts, you agree to hold the wind company harmless. One of the clauses in the contract, at the end of the contract, says that any of the conditions that have already been signed, the wind company has the right to alter them. Who would sign a contract like that? I have heard that one in Orangeville, and another couple who both have diabetes got very upset, and they had contracts for several turbines, and now, since it put them in a larger tax bracket, they now have to pay for their own diabetes medicine. And after 15 years, they do have to pay taxes on, and the wind turbines do erode the tax base, because these farmers aren't paying taxes on the land that have the turbines on. So the rest of the people in the town, the prices of taxes in Wyoming County, I believe, is approximately 12% since the first wind farm came in. So it does erode the tax base to the people that are innocent, and the people that made money, well, they're off, they have to live with them, but they're not doing as bad as other people.
The Wyoming County taxes have gone up over 85% over the past 13 years, another 9.68% last year, in direct correlation with the installation of wind factories here. People like to say, oh, we're going to get tax abatement. You may get your town taxes relieved for a number of years. But that's going to go away. They're already finding that to be the case in Sheldon, and a project up north too. The pilot ended, and so the town taxes are coming back. You're never getting rid of the turbines. And like I said, it hasn't. Wyoming County taxes up over 85% over the number of years we've had turbines here. They have done nothing to help relieve the tax burden on the citizen here. Nothing. My background is as a New York State certified health educator. I take health very seriously. That's why I got into it as a career. And that's why this drives me insane, like Al was talking about, the health effects. But all around, this is the only thing that has ever been reliably generated by industrial wind is complete and utter civil discord. They don't work. It's like having, why would you own a car if you couldn't count on it to turn on when you needed to go somewhere? If it only turned on 10 to 20% of the time, if that, you would have to own another reliable vehicle so you could get to work on time. And that's exactly what is going on to the New York State ratepayer, and they don't get it. Wind, the diffuse energy of wind, cannot supply, it does not supply modern power. That is reliable, dispatchable baseload power. It can't. It's the very nature of wind. It's intermittent. It's unreliable. It's volatile. And it's volatile on the grid. If you look at, and they keep the information secret. They won't give you the information. You have to do serious digging to find anything, even though it should be public record. But looking at wind energy on the grid is like looking at a Geiger counter. And to balance the load on the grid at any given time, it needs to be matched with another power source, because you need to supply this dependable power so that when you flick your switch, your light comes on. The only power source that really does that can be ramped up and down quickly enough to match with wind is natural gas. That's why it always cracks me up when I see these anti-fracking people pushing wind, because they just are clueless that by doing that, they're pushing for more natural gas. In fact, the way that, because I got involved in this so early and was doing research on it from the beginning, the irony of the whole thing is that, you know, Governor Cuomo says he's now pushing for 50% renewables by 2030. Well, before they started throwing all these billions of dollars into the wind, literally, we were already getting 50% of our electricity supply in New York State from renewables. We had 19% from hydro, and another 29% coming from nuclear, and another 1% coming from all other renewables, which would include wind, solar, geothermal, wood. And so here we already were getting 50% emissions-free sources. And so what has happened since they've literally thrown billions of dollars into it, hundreds of billions, and totally ruined much of the beautiful countrysides of rural New York State and our communities. Now they've amped up hydro to be producing about 23%. Nuclear is still around 30%. And we're now getting another total of 3% from all other renewables. So that includes wind, solar, geothermal, biofuels, all those hundreds of billions of dollars, and that's the slight change we've seen. Now the governor is saying that he went, you know, I call him the Enviro Wacko crowd. And believe me, I am all about the environment. My backyard is certified with the National Wildlife Federation as a backyard wildlife habitat. And I'm a organic gardener, certified Cornell master gardener. I'm all about the environment. Wind is not the answer. People that are pushing it are brainwashed and they don't know the facts.
Or they're making money.
Anybody that wants to talk about energy issues first needs to get educated about the difference between energy and power. They should read this book by Robert Bryce called Power Hungry, The Myths of Green Energy and the Real Fuels of the Future, and he has a newer book out called Smaller, Denser, Lighter, Faster, Cheaper. And it talks about, I mean, just consider the analogy of a telephone. You know, things in our television, things used to be big. You know, the telephone had to be hooked on the wall. Now look at you got, and computers were humongous. Now you have virtually a computer that you can hold in your hand. That's how technology has advanced. Industrial wind is antiquated. It's back from centuries ago. It's what they used to pump water in Holland. And those windmills are not what they are. I despise it when they call them windmills. They're not windmills. They are industrial wind turbines. When Kathy was speaking, it spurred a couple of thoughts. The fact that these ones they're proposing now along one of a migratory bird area, which the whole state is, along the shores of Lake Ontario to be 650 feet tall, if not taller. They still won't even tell the community exactly
Exactly.
what turbine model or how
Or
tall
where they're
they're going to
going.
be or where exactly they're going to be. It's all private information. We're going to dump this on you, but we're not going to tell you
you're
what
gonna
exactly
pay
it
for it.
is. Yeah. And there is no building in New York State that's that tall. Especially out here in upstate, central, and western New York. We are beautiful rural rolling hillsides that if they want to make some money, how about we exploit our natural assets and push tourism? Nobody they like to. I just read an article in Forbes. I had to laugh, and I think it was by a New York State PSC woman saying that, oh, and then there's turbine tourism. That is just, I mean, how dumb do they think people are? There is nobody driving here and staying overnight to visit the turbine factories. If they stop, they're stopping on the side of the road saying, oh, look at that. And then they drive on. It is not bringing any money into the county. It enriches a few large landowners and the crony politicians in bed with the big wind corporations. And the rest of us, the heck with you.
The towns get paid a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, PILOT. The towns get that up front. The landowner that sold himself to the devil and thrown the community under the bus, they get paid by the kilowatt. So they're told,
An annual fee.
well, in Arcade where they're putting them in, they were told that they would be paid, so sign up here, it's going to be better for you, which it never will be, by the kilowatt. Because
Well, then things have changed over time.
right, they're trying to sign more people up as more people become educated. But the pilot payment that they make to the towns is a fraction of what the actual tax base would be. We know that because Jim Herman, who is an Orangeville Town Board member, he had a piece of property that he sold to another wind company in the town of Orangeville. And when it came onto the tax roll, at the appropriate time that the pilot ended, it was millions, like maybe $6 million that properties assessed for, as opposed to the $623,000 that they're paying Orangeville, that Invenergy's paying Orangeville now for the 58 turbines. The turbine company will pay toward the schools. Invenergy paid $120,000, sounds like a lot of money, for 2 schools. Divide that, that's $60,000, maybe 1 teacher's salary. The schools are closing or trying to consolidate, especially in Attica, because the enrollment's not up, just not up. We aren't having large amounts of kids, so they can't.
People are moving out.
Right, they do not support the schools because there's no students for that. So it's a fallacy. The money sounds really good, but it's not when you do the homework. Now, as you were saying, Mary Kay, the kilowatt hours, you divide how much the electricity is generated by how many billions of dollars it costs to put these things up and to keep them up, it's a negative return. Just do the math. That's all you got to do, just do the math. When they put these things up, I'm talking about the towns and being divided. This is exactly what happened in this town, exactly what happened down this road. Nobody talks to anybody because the turbine and lease land owners, I don't want to have anything to do with them. They threw me under the bus. They didn't give a hoot about me at one bit. We've had 4 people move away that were good, fortunate enough to have the ability to move away. My husband and I were asked, why are we staying? We went and did a deposition because we're actually in a litigation. And the attorney said, well, why do you stay there? Well, I asked him, why would I not want to stay here? We moved here from the city, did a tour of New York State with my husband's employment. We chose to live here. We want to live here. We have multiple acres of land that we have left as natural. We don't want the farmers farming it. We don't want to do anything but keep it for the birds, land, grass nesting birds and the small game, large game, because when the turbines are put in, The land is clear cut. You imagine that. Take a forest and just cut it all down, just shove it all out of there. That's what they do. And they won't tell you that, oh, no, no. But that's what they do. Go look at the pictures. None of that's made up. Go look. Challenge you people that are going to see this. Do your homework. Get the information. Do not let them tell you what they want you to hear. It's not going to be true. It's going to be what they want. Whether you like the current president or not doesn't matter. The fact that that man, current president Donald Trump, said he's going to bring the money back into this country. This is what he's talking about. The companies that make these things in Texas, the other one, Siemens is the other company that makes the components. They take the money overseas and they're not buying anything here. They're not building anything here. So when Mr. Trump says he's going to change that, I believe him. I have nothing to lose at this point because I've lost it all. You've done a 360 around my house. This is where I live, not by choice. The closest one that they can by law is 1,320 feet, which is across the road here. However, all of these others are so visible, it doesn't matter how close they are. It's 720 feet from my property line or my house. My house is surrounded by these things. And what does that mean? My husband has a hearing loss. And whether you like it or not, if you suffer from a hearing loss, you're going to notice it more than a person that's able hearing, so to speak. They hear the infrasound more intently than an able hearing person. In this house here, with the windows closed and the doors closed, I can feel the vibration. I say that because I sit in silence. I'm actually a contemplative because that's the way God made me. And I sit in silence. And when I'm working on my computer, working on a project, you can hear, you can feel the house vibrating. You can, through the noise, or you can hear the noise through the doors and the windows all closed. You can hear the noise in this house because I don't have the radio on or the TV. I choose not to. I like to listen to the birds. I like to hear and see what nature has provided. I choose to live here. Don't want to move.
They benefit whoever it is that has gotten the tax credits to put them up. It's awful. There's no view shed. That's minor compared to the noise. It sounds like breaking surf or launching jets off the back of an aircraft carrier at times. Usually that's at night and you can hear them through the walls of the house. The only way I can sleep is with putting in earplugs most of the time. There's at least 16 surrounding this property. They just went one right after the other. We've been sold out by our illustrious town board for the town of Orangeville, Wyoming County. They're so unintelligent that the contract they signed called for a smaller nacelle, which is the big object on top of the tower that the blades sit on. They went and put in a larger nacelle, which creates more noise, and the blades are much bigger. One of the things I understand, they sign a 40-year non-disclosure agreement that they cannot speak about them negatively. The wind company is only looking out for itself. The green energy that they claim that these things provide is very negligible. The noise is horrific. If you like your view shed, you can kiss that goodbye too.